Hi guys. Tonight we slip quietly into the dim corridors of a medieval castle, that strange mixture of grandeur and discomfort, where the cold gets into you long before the story even begins, where you can almost hear your own footsteps tapping against stone that never truly warms, not even in summer, and the air feels cool on your cheeks as though someone left every shutter ajar, even though most of the openings are barely more than arrow slits. And before we go any deeper into those frozen halls, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are, because I always love those little snapshots of the world. And now, dim the lights, loosen your shoulders, slow your breathing, and step forward with me into the castle's silence as if you're trying not to wake the centuries. You stand there wrapped in a cloak that already feels far too thin for what you're about to face, and there's a tiny voice in your mind whispering that if you were actually dropped into this place with nothing but your modern hoodie, you probably would not last long, because these walls have seen generations of frost, winter storms, and damp winds that pry into the seams of stone like patient fingers, and every inch around you gives off the same slow, steady chill that drinks warmth from skin the moment you touch it, which is the first truth of the night. Medieval castles were engineering miracles when it came to defense, but they were not designed for comfort, and they could shrug off arrows and battering rams far more easily than they could shrug off a cold front, which is why staying warm wasn't a luxury for knights and residents, but a daily mission repeated in dozens of small habits that modern life has made almost invisible to us. As you move through the halls, you start to notice how the torches flicker in narrow sconces, giving off more drama than heat, heroic in movies and almost insulting in reality, because your breath still ghosts faintly in front of you, and the stones still feel like they're pulling the warmth out of your bones, and that's when the castle begins to reveal its quieter secrets. The little strategies that don't look impressive on a battlefield painting, but matter just as much as a sword, because a knight could survive a charge and still be beaten by winter if he couldn't keep his fingers working and his sleep deep enough to recover. You pass an alcove carved into the wall, just a small shelf that might have held a candle, and you can almost imagine someone stopping here night after night to warm his hands over a tiny flame that barely changed the air, muttering that the draught always finds that exact corner, and then a strange little detail floats up from old accounts. The kind historians love because it's so ordinary it feels true. In especially cold halls, people sometimes set warm ashes or embers into pottery bowls near their feet. Not quite a fire, and not quite a heater, just a small glowing comfort, charming until you picture one accidental nudge scattering ash into rushes and straw, because fire safety back then wasn't a system so much as a hope and a habit, and the constant watchfulness of tired eyes. And then you feel it, the way the corridor narrows and channels air like a funnel, and you start wondering whether the castle is simply unlucky in its drafts, or if those gusts were partly the side effects of deliberate airflow meant to carry smoke up and out, because medieval buildings often lived in a tense relationship between warmth and ventilation, and even when a design worked beautifully on paper, it could misbehave in real winter, sending smoke where it didn't belong, and pulling cold air into places that felt like they should have been sheltered. Still, you keep walking, because you begin to realize that warmth in a castle was rarely a single grand solution. It was a patchwork, a map of small victories, and the residents learn that map the way sailors learn currents, by living, by shivering, by noticing which doorway always leaked cold, and which corner held on to yesterday's heat just a little longer. When you drift into a chamber with a higher ceiling, your eyes catch a tapestry hanging on one wall, faded now, soft with age, and you remember something important that people often forget when they imagine medieval interiors as bare stone. Cloth was insulation, cloth was silence, cloth was comfort, and even one heavy textile changed the physics of the room by trapping warmer air, reducing the echo, softening the glare, and making the castle feel less like a cold shell and more like a place where human breath belonged. and you can almost smell old wool and smoke lingering in the threads like a memory. A little farther on, you find the first true heart of the night. A brazier glowing on a low tripod, filled with charcoal that gives off a deep, steady heat, the kind that doesn't flare and die but holds like a patient little sun. And you can feel your shoulders loosen without even thinking, because fire was the first shield against the castle's cold. And though a castle might have dozens of fireplaces, it never felt like enough, because stone swallows heat faster than flames can feed it, and yet everyone gravitated toward the warmth anyway. Servants, guests, knights, all of them orbiting the same glow like planets around survival. Charcoal mattered here not because it was romantic, but because it burned hotter and cleaner than raw wood, which meant indoor braziers could warm a chamber with less choking smoke. And you can easily imagine a knight returning from patrol with fingers stiff and red, the metal of his gauntlets so cold it stings even through padding, crouching over a brazier like this and inching closer and closer, until someone warns him not to scorch his cloak, because medieval warmth often came with rules, and the rules were written in scorch marks and close calls. And then there's the great fireplace itself, carved into the far wall like a gateway, big enough to feel like architecture rather than furniture, and you picture it roaring at night, turning armor into molten highlights, and making faces look softer in the orange light, while somewhere a young servant is handed the long poker at dawn, and told to coax life from embers as if waking the castle's heartbeat, because in winter, fire wasn't just comfort, it was continuity, a thing you guarded the way you'd guard a door. But as soothing as fire is, you also start to notice its limits, because warmth in a castle was often a circle surrounded by cold edges, and the moment you step away from the flame, the chill creeps back in, like it had only been waiting politely. And that's when you begin to understand why the second great strategy wasn't about the room at all, but about the body. Layers were not fashion, they were engineering. Linen close to the skin, wool above it to trap air and manage dampness, then heavier cloaks, fur linings when you could afford them, and garments often cut generously on purpose, so air could sit between layers like invisible padding, turning a person into a small travelling climate. And you can almost smell that faint lanolin scent in the wool, earthy and warm in a way that feels oddly comforting, like the fabric is alive. You imagine a knight's gambeson, thick and quilted, not just armor padding but winter protection, and over it the mail that starts off cold to the touch, but eventually warms from the body and becomes a strange kind of shell. And you realize that medieval warmth was rarely about eliminating cold, it was about coexisting with it, carrying your own heat and guarding it with habits, with cloth, with patience, with knowing when to tighten a belt so warmth doesn't leak upward, when to pull a hood low so your ears don't ache, when to keep moving just enough that the blood stays brave. And then the castle shows you another quiet trick under your feet. Rushes layered across the stone floor, crisp stalks and older mats beneath, sometimes sprinkled with herbs like lavender, wormwood, mint, not just for scent, but to discourage pests and soften the misery of dampness. And when you step across them, the sound changes, the echo dulls, and even the cold feels slightly less aggressive, because the stone isn't biting straight through your soles anymore, and suddenly the hall feels less like a corridor of punishment, and more like a lived-in place where people tried, in small, stubborn ways, to make winter tolerable. From here, the scent of food begins to drift toward you, warm and savoury, because the kitchen was another furnace of the castle, not only filling bellies but radiating heat into nearby chambers, and a bowl of hot stew thick with barley and onions and fat was insulation you could swallow, heat that stayed with you longer than a torch ever could. And as you follow that smell, you start to realize something almost tender. Medieval warmth wasn't one big secret. It was 100 little ones, stitched into routine, and the more you notice them, the more you can almost feel the castle becoming a map of human problem-solving. And now, as you move away from the noisy comfort of fires and kitchens, you slip into the smaller, quieter side of the fortress, the inner core where the stone is thicker, and the rooms are tucked tightly between other rooms, and the moment you cross the threshold into a little chamber, the air changes, still and hushed and noticeably less frigid than the corridor behind you. Not because there's a roaring hearth here, but because the space itself is shaped to hold what warmth it can, with a lower ceiling that keeps heat from escaping upward into emptiness, and walls that act like a buffer against the outside world. And knights knew these places the way tired people always do, because when your life is cold, you memorize comfort by instinct. There's a wooden bench against the wall, worn smooth by years of bodies settling into it, and you imagine a knight lowering himself down after a long day, pulling off damp gloves, letting his shoulders sag as he listens to the faint sounds of the castle beyond. And maybe he lights a beeswax candle that brightens the room just enough to write a few lines or polish a buckle. And while a candle cannot truly heat a hall, in a space this compact even a little flame matters, because warmth isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a small, steady presence that takes the sting out of the air. And then you remember another small practice, mentioned in passing in old routines, like it was nothing: heated stones carried from the hearth or kitchen, wrapped in cloth, brought into chambers like this and placed near hands or feet, releasing gentle warmth for hours, turning a cold room into a modest refuge. And when you imagine your fingers resting on one of those stones, you can almost feel the slow pulse of heat seeping into your skin like a heartbeat, and you start to see how medieval life was full of these portable comforts, improvised but repeated until they became tradition. You lift the lid of a small wooden chest and find folded fabric inside, spare blankets, extra hoods, thick wool that smells faintly of smoke and lanolin, and you picture this room doubling as a place to dry garments and warm bedding, because dampness was the cold's ally, and anything wet became a thief that stole body heat faster than stone ever could. So the castle fought back in its quiet way by gathering warmth where it could, and using it to drive out moisture, slowly, patiently, one cloak at a time. And as you sit there for a moment, letting that imagined stillness settle over you, you begin to understand why knights didn't rely on one single method to stay warm. Because the castle was unpredictable, the weather cruel, the drafts stubborn, and the solutions had to overlap like layers of cloth. So when the fire was low, you leaned on clothing. When the corridor was bitter, you sought the inner rooms. When your boots were soaked, you dried them near a warm stone. When sleep was thin, you pulled closer to other bodies, because shared warmth was its own kind of shelter. And in a world without central heating, the simplest technology was often just proximity. You can almost hear it now, the faint murmur of servants in the hallway, the soft rustle of wool as someone shifts, the tiny click of a belt buckle being loosened, and you imagine a knight curling inside his cloak on that bench, leaning against the warmer side of the wall, eyes heavy, breathing slower, listening to the castle like it's a living animal around him. And somewhere nearby another door opens and closes, and a whisper passes, and someone mentions that the wind is getting worse outside, and someone else answers that it doesn't matter, as long as the inner rooms hold. And that's when you realize the next secret is waiting just beyond this chamber, because there were rooms above warm kitchens, chambers built against chimneys, sleeping spaces chosen not for status but for heat. And the castle had a whole hidden hierarchy of warmth that most visitors never understood. And as you stand and step back into the corridor, pulling your cloak tighter again, you follow that hierarchy deeper, toward the places where a knight would choose to sleep on the coldest nights, toward the surprising spots where heat rose and lingered, and toward the small, clever adaptations that turn a frozen fortress into something just barely livable. Because the next thing you notice, as you round the corner and feel the air subtly shift, is that the floor beneath you is not as cold as it should be, and you pause and look down and realize you're standing above the castle kitchen itself, the great furnace of the fortress, and suddenly it makes sense. The faint warmth under your boots, the air less sharp here, the smell of wood smoke rising from the floorboards like a ghost of comfort. This chamber, positioned directly above the kitchen, was one of the most coveted winter sleeping spots in the entire castle. It wasn't about luxury or privilege, it was simple physics. Heat rises, the fire that boiled stews and baked bread during the day sent warmth upward through the stone, bleeding into the floor above, creating what historians call a warm chamber. A phrase that sounds quaint until you remember what it meant to feel warmth in a world without radiators. You step forward, noticing how the stone beneath your boots holds a gentle, even temperature, not hot but less biting. It feels alive, as though some memory of the kitchen fires still hums beneath the surface. A knight who managed to sleep in this room would wake with slightly warmer feet and fingers, small mercies that could mean everything in a medieval winter. Some chroniclers even hint that higher-ranking servants or visiting guests were strategically housed in rooms above the great kitchen for this very reason. Not status, but survival. The air smells faintly of baked bread and wood ash, traces of the life below. You can almost imagine the muffled clatter of pots, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, the voices of tired cooks echoing through the floorboards as their heat climbs up to you. It's not glamorous warmth. It's borrowed warmth, accidental warmth, the kind that medieval people learned to capture wherever they could. You pause beside a narrow bed tucked into an alcove. The straw mattress looks lumpy, but when you imagine lying on it, the thought is almost comforting. Straw was one of the most underrated insulators of the Middle Ages, cheap, abundant, and remarkably good at trapping air. The trick was keeping it dry. Damp straw turned to mildew within days, so castle servants changed it regularly, mixing in herbs like thyme or mint to keep pests away. In wealthier households, straw might be layered with linen or woolen sheets, a luxury of softness and scent in an age of rough stone and iron. A blanket lies folded at the foot of the bed, thick wool, patched, heavy, and smelling faintly of smoke. You run your fingers across it, and imagine how many winters it has seen, how many times it's been hung near a fire to dry, how many bodies have curled beneath it while storms raged outside. In medieval Europe, wool wasn't just fabric, it was survival. Its lanolin oil made it naturally water-resistant, and it could hold heat even when damp. No wonder nearly every inventory of castle goods lists bolts of wool, cloaks, tunics, blankets, all carefully tracked, all worth their weight in comfort. You lower yourself to the bed, letting the imagined straw rustle softly beneath you. The sound is oddly soothing, a reminder that warmth here wasn't silent. It was the crackle of a fire, the whisper of rushes underfoot, the hiss of a brazier, the steady breath of other people nearby. Even the noises were part of the survival system, and you start to notice something deeper. How communal warmth shaped medieval life. Few people slept alone in winter. Even nobles often shared chambers, and servants slept in clusters on pallets or benches near each other for heat. There's a simple, humbling truth in that body heat was the most reliable heater of all. A chronicler once described it bluntly. In cold months they lay together as pups in a den. It wasn't scandalous, it was practical. Human warmth was the one resource no castle could store, but everyone could share. You can almost picture it now. A line of sleeping figures under heavy blankets, shoulders touching, breath fogging the air. The faint golden light of a dying candle flickering against the wall. Somewhere a small pot of embers glows red, giving off a last thread of heat. Outside the wind howls around the towers, snow piling in the courtyard, and inside the people sleep like a single creature, gathered tight against the cold. As you sit there in the quiet of this imagined chamber, you realize that every element of warmth in a medieval castle, from fires to clothing to rushes to shared breath, was part of a single fragile ecosystem, constantly balancing against the stone's indifference. The castle itself never cared if its people froze. They had to teach it to care. One ember, one cloak, one room at a time. And yet there's still one final secret of warmth left hidden in these walls, one that didn't come from fire or fabric or human company, but from the architecture itself, the ingenious systems some castles developed to move heat like water through stone. long before the modern idea of central heating even existed. You rise slowly from the bed, your breath forming a pale cloud as you turn toward a narrow spiral staircase leading downward. The air grows cooler again, your fingers brushing the rough curve of the wall as you descend. Below you waits the great secret. The hypocaust chambers and hidden flues, the quiet miracle of medieval engineering that let castles breathe warmth through their very bones. You reach the bottom of the staircase and step into a low stone passage where the air feels different. Not cold exactly, but thick with the scent of old ash and damp mortar. A faint hum seems to vibrate through the walls, the echo of fires long gone. You're standing above what was, in some castles, one of the most advanced features of medieval heating, the hypocaust, an underfloor system that carried warmth through hidden channels, centuries before anyone dreamed of modern central heating. It's easy to miss, because nothing here glows or burns anymore. You only see the remains, a narrow tunnel, low arches bricked into the foundation, small vents cut through the stone like the breathing holes of some slumbering creature. But in its day, this was ingenious. Fires built in furnaces at one end pushed hot air through the network of flues beneath the floors, warming the rooms above from below. It wasn't perfect. The system was expensive to build and maintain, and only a few great castles or monasteries could afford it. Still, where it worked, it turned icy chambers into spaces that felt almost miraculous by medieval standards. You crouch to look closer, tracing your hand along the sooty stone. You can almost feel the ghost of heat still clinging there, a whisper of warmth that once rose through flagstones to the feet of kings and bishops. Historical records mention these hypocasts in royal apartments and chapels, rooms too sacred or too important to allow frost to invade. The Romans had pioneered the technology centuries earlier, and a few clever medieval builders revived it, though at enormous cost. Wood and charcoal were precious. Every degree of heat was bought with labor and forest. You step deeper into the chamber, following the faint outline of the old ducts. Some lead upward, disappearing into walls that once carried smoke and hot air to upper rooms. It's fascinating to think how much thought went into something as simple as surviving winter. Every inch of this place is evidence that warmth wasn't just comfort. It was a form of power. Those who could afford it were not only safer from cold, but from sickness, fatigue, despair. In the hierarchy of medieval life, heat was privilege. You straighten and look up at the ceiling, imagining the room above, the one that would have basked in the faint glow of this underground furnace. Perhaps it was the Lord's private chamber, or a chapel where candles never froze solid in their holders. You can almost see the flicker of light on carved stone, hear the murmur of voices reciting morning prayers as warmth rose quietly through the floor like invisible incense. Then you catch a scent, imagined or not. It feels real, the smell of burning oak and pine pitch. You follow it toward a narrow opening that leads into a wider hall. Here the ceiling lifts higher, the air cool again, but as you walk, you begin to notice how warmth in a castle wasn't confined to fire or fabric or walls. It was something shared, traded, chased, and remembered. Every ember mattered, because life here revolved around the balance between light and frost. In some corners, servants might have placed heated stones in small baskets, carried them from room to room like portable suns. In others, iron pans filled with glowing coals were slid under beds to warm the sheets before anyone dared slip inside. It was an intimate kind of technology, a conversation between human need and raw nature. You pause, leaning against the cool wall, and imagine the castle in full winter, snow thick on the towers, wind rattling shutters, the world outside reduced to silence. Inside, small fires gleam in scattered rooms, thin smoke curling into the rafters, voices murmuring low. Somewhere a knight checks the embers before bed, someone else tucks a heated stone beneath a blanket, and a servant tiptoes past, clutching a candle whose flame bends under every draught. This was how nights stayed warm, not through grand inventions or endless comfort, but through 1,000 small acts of defiance against the cold. Every fire lit, Every cloak sewn, every shared breath between weary bodies was a quiet victory. The castle never truly grew warm. It only learned to forgive the cold for a few fleeting hours at a time. And as you stand there now, surrounded by the silence of stone, you realize that's what makes these places so haunting. The knowledge that warmth here was never guaranteed, that every flicker of heat was earned, cherished, and remembered long after the embers died. You take one last look down the dark tunnel, where the old flues vanish into shadow, and imagine a final glowing coal resting there, fading slowly, patiently, like the memory of every winter survived. You move deeper along the passage, and the sound of the wind returns, curling through the cracks like a reminder that even the cleverest engineering could never silence the cold for long. The castle breathes around you, stone expanding and contracting with the shifting temperature, timbers creaking faintly overhead. For all its might, it's still a living thing, one that must endure the same winter as the people inside it. You climb a short stairway and emerge into another chamber, this one higher up, where pale light filters through a slit window. The air bites again, but you notice something unusual. The scent of beeswax and the faint shimmer of metal. This must have been an armory, a room filled with cold steel that could freeze a man's fingers in seconds. Yet even here, knights had their rituals to fight the chill. You picture a line of helmets hanging from wooden pegs, their surfaces glinting faintly, each one polished near the brazier before a campaign, not only to keep them clean but to drive out the biting damp that could rust the iron overnight. Metal and moisture were eternal enemies in the medieval world. Squires would spend hours rubbing oil or animal fat into the armor's joints, sometimes even heating the plates slightly to make the grease spread evenly. The work wasn't glamorous, but in the depth of winter, every act of care doubled as an act of warmth, not for vanity but for survival. A memory from old household records drifts through your thoughts. Armorers working with red, raw hands near tiny forges, using the same fires that tempered swords to warm their own faces when no one was watching. You can almost hear the faint ring of a hammer on metal echoing through the chill, the hiss of cooling steel in water, the sigh of a man leaning too close to the coals for comfort. The cold here was a teacher. It taught patience, discipline, and gratitude for heat in any form. Even a candle could feel like mercy. In this room you imagine one burning near the window, its wax dripping slowly down the holder, the flames struggling against every gust that sneaks through the arrow slit. Someone sets their hands above it anyway, feeling the tiniest trace of warmth, not enough to heat the body, but enough to keep the spirit from breaking. You walk on, your footsteps soft against the stone. The corridor opens again into a great hall, vast and echoing, the heart of the castle. The ceiling soars above you, smoke-stained from centuries of fires, and the hearth at the far end glows faintly even now in your imagination. Logs stacked high, sparks leaping like tiny stars. Around it, life happened. Meals, songs, arguments, prayers. Warmth wasn't just physical here. It was emotional. It was the gathering itself, the closeness of bodies and voices and laughter that kept the cold from winning. You stand there for a moment, letting the imagined hum of it all surround you, the clatter of wooden bowls, the murmur of conversation, the pop of burning sap in the logs, and you realize that warmth, in a medieval castle, was more than a temperature. It was belonging. It was the fragile thread that tied people together in the darkness of winter, proof that life could still glow even when the world outside froze solid. You walk closer to the fire, watching the way its light dances against the stone, and as the story slows you feel the same ancient truth settle over you, that no matter how cold the night becomes, as long as a single flame survives, the castle and the people within it endure. As the fire flickers in the vast hall, you notice how the light reaches only so far before surrendering to the shadows. Beyond its warm circle, the corners of the room sink into darkness where the cold still rules untouched. That contrast, heat and shadow, glow and frost, was the rhythm of every winter night in a medieval castle. You imagine the hall alive, servants moving quietly, placing more logs on the fire, a knight removing his gloves and leaning close enough to feel the sparks prick his face. Children chasing each other near the warmth until a weary steward scolds them for stirring up embers. The air smells of smoke, roasting meat, and wet wool. Laughter mixes with the wind rattling the shutters. Along the walls, benches are lined with sheepskins and fur throws. They aren't decorations. They're insulation. Every piece of fabric hanging here, every curtain drawn across a doorway, is a barrier between life and frost. Thick woolen draperies turn drafty archways into pockets of trapped warmth. The tapestries tell stories, yes, hunts, battles, legends, but their real purpose is far simpler, to stop the chill from seeping through the stones. Near the hearth sits a tall brass stand holding a wide basin filled with glowing coals. You recognize it as a chafing dish, one of the simplest and most precious inventions of medieval comfort. Servants would carry smaller versions into bedrooms or dining spaces, setting them under tables or beds. The heat rose slowly, invisibly softening the sting of winter. You imagine sliding your hands above one, feeling the steady, almost living warmth it gives off. At the far end of the hall, a woman sits with a spinning wheel, her cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders. Wool dust glitters faintly in the firelight as she spins thread that will become another blanket, another cloak, another small defense against the cold. Across from her, a young page polishes a pair of boots, his breath puffing faintly in the air. Behind them, the castle cat curls up near the embers, knowing exactly where to sleep. The fire pops, sending a tiny spray of sparks upward. For a heartbeat, the entire hall seems to pulse with warmth and light, and then the glow settles again, breathing slow and steady like a living heart. You realize that this, the hearth, was not just furniture but the soul of the medieval home. Its Latin root focus still echoes in our language for a reason. A knight sits nearest the blaze, his armor stripped away, wearing only his padded tunic. His face is rough with cold and fatigue, but as he extends his hands to the fire, the tension eases, his fingers flex. The light paints soft gold across his skin. For a moment he doesn't look like a warrior, he looks like any other man, grateful for something simple and universal: warmth. And when he finally stands, brushing soot from his cloak, you can almost hear him murmuring a small prayer, thankful for the fire, for the night that didn't kill him, for the fragile peace that warmth provides between one frost and the next. You step back slowly, watching the flames dance higher, the shadows lean closer, the breath of the castle settling into silence again. Somewhere above, the wind moans through the battlements, but here inside a single ember holds steady, defiant, ancient, alive. You let the moment linger, feeling the story drift toward quiet, not ending, just dimming, like a fire being banked for the night, until the last thought glows softly in your mind. In those frozen castles of stone, warmth was never a given. It was earned, kindled, and kept alive the same way stories are, hand to hand, heart to heart, flame to flame. Outside, the storm gathers again, sweeping snow across the battlements, coating the parapets in ice so thick it glitters like crystal under the pale moon. The castle sighs beneath the weight of the wind, its timbers creaking, its walls whispering, yet inside life still glows faintly, a stubborn constellation of warmth hidden behind layers of stone and routine. You follow the faint glow through another doorway and find yourself in the servants' quarters, humbler and lower than the great hall, but somehow cozier. The ceilings dip so low you could touch them, and the air feels denser here, warmer, as if the combined breath of those who worked and slept in this space still lingers centuries later. A few clay lamps burn weakly on a shelf. The scent is earthy: wool, smoke, straw, humanity. This was where real warmth lived. Not the noble kind built with fireplaces and fine tapestries, but the warmth of proximity. Servants slept side by side on narrow pallets, their bodies pressed together beneath shared blankets. A single candle, a single ember in a brazier could make this cramped chamber feel like a sanctuary compared to the stone corridors beyond. You imagine them there now, a cook's apprentice snoring softly beside a stable boy, a washerwoman with her hands cracked from cold, tucking them beneath the blanket for the first time all day. They talk in whispers, laugh quietly, complain about the draft that sneaks through the cracks, and then drift into sleep. Their warmth overlaps, multiplies, spreading across the small room like an invisible quilt. Against the far wall, a small pot of embers glows faintly. Someone had the presence of mind to bank the coals before bed, covering them with ash so they would still be alive come morning. That ember is more precious than gold. It means no one will have to wake before dawn to start the fire from scratch. It means the castle's heart won't stop beating during the long night. You crouch near it, feeling its gentle heat against your palm. It's astonishing how much comfort something so small can hold. A few dying coals in a pot, keeping an entire room just a little above freezing. For the people of the Middle Ages, that little difference was everything. Life and misery were separated by a handful of degrees. The ember shifts, a soft hiss of air escaping, as if the castle itself exhales. You can almost hear the sound of quiet breathing all around, the rhythm of people who have learned to live with cold, not against it. Above them, the nobles sleep beneath fur blankets, their rooms perfumed with burning pine and beeswax candles, while below the servants sleep with the same gratitude, not for luxury but for the shared miracle of warmth itself. You straighten and look around the room one last time. The walls are darkened by centuries of smoke. The rushes underfoot rustle faintly when you move. A folded cloak hangs from a wooden peg, ready for another day of labor in the icy courtyard. Nothing here glitters, nothing here is grand. Yet this is where the cold truly lost. Because in the end it wasn't stone or tapestries or even fire that kept a medieval castle alive through winter. It was the people, their breath, their movement, their persistence, their quiet rituals of survival. They turned frozen walls into a home simply by refusing to surrender to the frost. And as the wind howls outside, the ember in the pot glows a little brighter, the last light in a sea of cold, reminding you that warmth in any age, then or now, is something we build together, one fragile spark at a time. You turn to leave the room, the air behind you still holding its faint, smoky heat. The corridor ahead looks dark again, the chill returning like an old companion, but somewhere deep in the castle's belly, another fire still burns, another ember waits. Another pair of hands will soon cup it, shield it and pass it on, because the story of warmth, like the story of humanity itself, never truly ends. And as you step once more into the corridor, the castle exhales a long, low breath, that deep winter silence that feels almost alive. The wind groans softly beyond the walls, carrying with it the scent of pine smoke and snow. Somewhere a shutter bangs once against the stone, then stills. You walk slowly, your footsteps muffled by rushes, each step echoing faintly up through the ancient ribs of the fortress. You find yourself drawn upward now, climbing a narrow spiral staircase that twists tighter with every turn. The air grows colder but lighter too, thinner, sharper, and filled with the quiet hum of distant wind. When you emerge at the top, you are in the solar, the private upper chamber, where the lord and lady of the castle would retreat from the draughts below. Here, warmth is subtle, not blazing fire, but the gathered comfort of thick curtains, layered carpets, furs draped over wooden chairs, and beeswax candles glowing gold. A tall hearth glows in the far wall, its flames smaller than those of the great hall, but steadier, gentler. The air smells of resin and oak smoke. You move toward it, and notice how everything in this room is arranged with warmth in mind. The bed stands near the fire, its frame heavy oak, the mattress stuffed with straw and layered with woolen blankets and fur. Bed curtains hang around it, thick enough to create a pocket of trapped heat once drawn. You imagine how, in the bitterest nights, servants would come to warm the linens with heated stones or pans of coals, slipping them under the covers before their lord and lady lay down. The warmth would fade within an hour, But for that hour, the world outside did not exist. You trace your fingers along the carved wood of the bedpost, feeling the smoothness worn by centuries of hands. Even luxury here was practical: fur trims, embroidered curtains, cushions stuffed with feathers, every item a small act of rebellion against the cold. On the table by the bed, a silver cup catches the light from the fire. Inside, you can almost imagine a drink of warm spiced wine, fragrant with clove and cinnamon, the kind that medieval nobles sipped to drive frost from the blood. You sit for a moment on the edge of the bed, feeling the imagined weight of the blankets pressing gently against your shoulders. You realize that comfort in a medieval castle was not about abundance. It was about strategy, knowing how to capture and preserve what little heat existed, and how to turn endurance into routine. Every stone, every garment, every ritual was part of an unspoken pact between human ingenuity and nature's indifference. Then a sound catches your ear, the soft drip of melted snow from a windowsill, the sigh of the wind easing just slightly. You turn toward the narrow slit window, where the pale dawn light is beginning to push through. Outside, the world glows white and silent, a landscape frozen in perfect stillness. The castle stands above it all, stubborn and stoic, its fires flickering deep inside like a beating heart under layers of armor. And in that moment, you understand what it truly meant for knights to stay warm. It was never just about heat. It was about endurance, ritual, and the quiet faith that morning would come again. You imagine the first stirrings of life as the day begins, servants rekindling the hearths, armorers warming metal by the forge, kitchen fires roaring to life, and the great hall once again filling with the sound of human warmth returning. The cold never left, but the people never stopped lighting fires. That was their victory. And in a way, it still is ours. Because somewhere in the quiet flicker of those flames, in the patience of those hands shielding embers through the night, lies the same truth that keeps every age alive, that even in a world built of stone and ice, warmth endures, if someone is willing to tend the fire. And now the light grows stronger, slipping through the narrow window slits and catching the edges of the smoke that still drifts lazily across the beams. The night has loosened its grip. You can almost feel the air shifting, less cruel, more forgiving, as the first warmth of morning creeps back into the castle. You walk toward the window, resting your hand against the cold stone sill. Far below, the courtyard is waking. Servants move between the stables and kitchens, their breath rising in pale clouds. Someone carries a basket of wood, another drags a bundle of reeds across the frost. The rhythm of survival begins again. Quiet but determined. A knight steps into view, his cloak drawn tight, his armor half buckled, the metal gleaming faintly. Where the early light catches it, he stands still for a moment, looking out at the frozen hills beyond the walls, the same hills he's patrolled 100 times. Then he exhales, his breath curling into the air, and turns back toward the warmth waiting inside. His every motion, from the way he adjusts his gloves to the way he tilts his head toward the faint glow of smoke, tells you the same thing. He's learned to live with the cold, not fight it. You follow the image in your mind, fires rekindling one by one through the castle, the kitchen hearth bursting to life, servants huddled around its first sparks, the great hall's embers stirred into orange flame by the long poker. The brazier in the armory, glowing back to red as an apprentice, feeds it a handful of charcoal. The castle breathes again, not warm yet, but alive. Up in the solar, the lady of the house sits by her window, wrapping a woolen shawl around her shoulders. Her maid pours warm water from a pot that's been resting by the hearth all night, steam curling softly between them. The smell of bread baking reaches even here, faint but steady. Another kind of warmth, one that fills the air instead of the skin. Everywhere you look, warmth has a new face. A flame, a garment, a cup of wine, a shared laugh, a loaf of bread. You begin to see how survival in these frozen walls wasn't only about heat, but about hope, the quiet kind that grows from small routines, repeated faithfully through endless winters. You close your eyes and listen. The the soft thud of wood on the hearth, the whisper of straw beneath boots, the low murmur of human voices weaving through the corridors. The sounds layer together like the fabrics and fires of the castle itself, imperfect, temporary but enduring. And then it hits you, gentle but absolute. The warmth you've been following all this time was never really in the stone or the flame. It was in the people, in their patience, in their craft, in their refusal to let the cold have the last word. You take one last slow breath, the air carrying both the chill of the stone and the faint comfort of smoke. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, soft and steady, as though the world has decided to wrap the castle in one more blanket. The fire crackles behind you, steady, eternal, alive. And as you turn to leave, you realize that every winter since, every fireplace, every candle, every act of keeping warm, all of it is just an echo of these same walls, these same people, and their timeless human promise that even when the world turns to ice, someone will always stay to tend the fire. As you descend the final staircase, the light softens and the castle feels quieter now, as though it's exhaling after a long night of endurance. The air carries the faint scent of soot and bread, the unmistakable perfume of morning after cold. You pause at the base of the stairwell, your hand on the rough wall, tracing the grooves carved by countless generations who have done the same. Knights, cooks, servants, children, all of them chasing warmth down these same corridors. You step into the courtyard. Snow still lies in thin layers across the flagstones, but the world no longer looks cruel. It glows. Sunlight hits the walls in streaks of gold, turning the frost to liquid glass. Steam curls from the kitchens, rising lazily toward the towers. You can almost hear the hum of life returning. The squeak of wagon wheels, the clang of a bucket against stone, the rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting firewood. A group of servants gathers by a small side door, rubbing their hands together, laughing quietly. One of them holds a clay pot wrapped in cloth, a travelling ember jar, still glowing from the night's fire. She lifts the lid, breathes carefully over it, and the coal inside flares back to life. That little spark will relight the forge, the kitchen, the guardroom, its warmth passed hand to hand, the castle's pulse carried through the morning like a secret. And watching her, you realize something profound about these ancient places, that survival was never grand. It was gentle, deliberate, ordinary, a shared bowl of soup, a folded cloak, a spark saved from dying coals. The cold could never truly be defeated, only negotiated with, one ember at a time. You walk toward the gatehouse. The drawbridge is dusted with snow, the moat below a thin sheet of ice. The air bites again, but it no longer feels hostile. You've learned its language now, the difference between cruel cold and living cold, the kind that teaches endurance instead of despair. You look back one last time at the towers, their stone edges glowing amber in the dawn. Inside those walls, hundreds of small fires burn unseen in hearths, in braziers, in hearths. Each one is a continuation of the same ancient ritual, the defiance of warmth against the endless winter. And as the wind passes through the courtyard, carrying a faint trail of smoke and the echo of crackling logs, you feel the story close like a door slowly drawn shut, not with finality but with calm. The castle remains behind you, eternal, breathing its mixture of ice and fire, of silence and survival. And you walk away with the quiet understanding that all warmth then or now comes down to the same fragile, beautiful act. Someone, somewhere, choosing to keep the fire alive through the night. And when you step beyond the outer gate, the air greets you with that first clean sting of winter morning. The snow crunches softly underfoot, the world outside the walls wide and pale and full of light. For a moment you glance back and the castle looks different now, less like a fortress, more like a living creature still holding its breath against the cold. Thin columns of smoke rise from its chimneys, curling upward into a sky washed in silver. The landscape stretches around it, bare trees glinting with frost, a frozen river shining like glass, crows circling lazily above the battlements. The wind bites, but it's no longer cruel. It feels ancient, honest, a reminder that winter itself was part of the rhythm that shaped every stone, every habit, every heart that lived within those walls. You imagine the night stirring awake inside, the shuffle of boots, the ring of steel, the slow kindling of every hearth, fires blooming one by one like sunrise spreading through the corridors. The castle has survived another night, and so have the people. You walk farther down the slope, hearing faint echoes behind you, the muffled clang of a drawbridge chain, a burst of laughter, the thud of wood being chopped. It feels almost like the heartbeat of the world returning after a long silence. And maybe that's the quiet truth this place leaves with you, that warmth was never permanent, but always reborn. Every dawn, someone lit the first flame. Every dusk, someone banked the embers to protect them. The cold was constant, but so was the courage to face it. You stop for a moment at the edge of the frozen moat, your breath rising like smoke, and look back at the castle one last time. Its towers catch the sun, and the light spills down its walls like molten gold, brief, fleeting, and beautiful. You close your eyes, listening to the distant crackle of fire carried on the wind, and the story folds into quiet again, the way every winter night once did, because the secret of how nights stayed warm was never really about the castles at all. It was about endurance, about the will to build light in the dark, about believing that warmth, like faith, like love, like hope, was always worth tending, no matter how cold the world became. And as the thought settles in, the snow begins to fall again, slow, soft, unhurried. Each flake drifts down, as if time itself has forgotten to rush. The world is hushed, wrapped in white silence. You stand still for a moment, listening, not for sound, but for the absence of it. No hoofbeats, no chatter, no clang of armor, just the heartbeat of winter and the steady rhythm of your breath. The castle behind you glows faintly through the mist, its fires burning unseen but steady, the faint curl of smoke from its chimneys rising like a quiet promise. Somewhere inside, a knight leans toward a hearth, rubbing his hands together. A servant checks the embers, tucking fresh wood beside the grate for later. The cook tests the warmth of her oven, all of them moving through small, familiar rituals, unaware that centuries later, someone would still wonder how they survived those frozen nights. You take a few steps farther down the path. The snow under your boots gives off that muted crunch that only deep cold can create. In your mind, you still feel the castle's warmth clinging faintly to your skin. The echo of every fire you've passed, every cloak and candle, every heartbeat that fought against the cold. You realize now that warmth isn't something you find, it's something you carry out with you. The fire follows, invisible but alive, held in memory, in imagination, in that part of you that refuses to let the night win. You stop on the ridge and look back one final time. The castle stands proud and still, smoke rising like breath into the pale sky, snow swirling around its towers in slow, graceful spirals. Its walls are old, its stones unyielding, but inside, within those cold corridors, those narrow rooms, those flickering flames, there remains a quiet defiance that never truly fades. The same defiance that once kept nights alive through centuries of winters, the same defiance that keeps every small flame burning tonight. And as you turn toward the horizon, the wind steadies, brushing your cloak as though to guide you onward. The castle fades into the snow behind you, and only one thought remains, that every ember, no matter how faint, can light a world of stone. And as the snow drifts quietly from the pale sky, the whole world seems to pause. Each flake twists in the wind before settling on the ground, soft and soundless. You stand there a moment, watching the castle fade behind a white veil, its towers half swallowed by the storm, its fires hidden deep within. What was once a fortress now looks almost human, tired, enduring, alive. A curl of smoke rises from the chimneys, thin and grey against the morning light. Somewhere inside, people are already stirring. A knight leaning close to a hearth, The cook checking her pot, servants brushing snow from the steps, a stable boy laughing as his breath turns to mist. Their lives continue exactly as they did the day before, and the one before that, not because winter spares them, but because they've learned how to live with it. You take a slow step forward, boots pressing into the snow until it crunches faintly beneath your heels. The air stings your cheeks but feels cleaner now, freer. You realize that the castle's warmth was never meant to last within its walls. It was meant to travel, carried in memory, in habit, in every small act of keeping something alive through the cold. When you glance back, the wind lifts a thin veil of snow from the battlements, and for a heartbeat you see the entire fortress glowing faintly gold in the early sun. It looks less like a monument and more like a lantern, ancient stone lit by hundreds of quiet flames inside. And you understand it then. The secret of warmth was never just fire or fabric or clever design, it was devotion. The daily choosing to protect the fragile, to feed the flame, to keep the night from swallowing everything. You pull your cloak tighter, and the snow swirls around you in gentle spirals. The castle grows smaller behind you, its light sinking into the distance, and the silence of the fields ahead feels almost kind. Because in the end, warmth was never about surviving the cold. It was about remembering that even in a world built of stone and ice, someone, somewhere would always choose to make it glow. And the snow keeps falling, slower now, drifting in loose spirals as if time itself has softened. The horizon glows faintly with the colour of morning pewter. Not yet sunrise, but close enough that the world feels about to wake. You draw your cloak tighter and exhale, watching your breath mingle with the quiet mist. The castle behind you is barely visible, its towers reduced to shadows wrapped in white. Only the smoke gives it away, thin, patient lines curling into the pale sky. You think of what those fires mean, not grandeur, not luxury, but survival. Each one tended by tired hands, each ember coaxed to life against the wind. The idea feels timeless. The centuries may have passed, but the ritual remains. Someone, somewhere, still wakes early to stir the ashes, to keep the dark from swallowing the day too soon. The snow crunches beneath your feet as you walk, and every step feels like a heartbeat, slow, steady, deliberate. The cold nips at your fingertips, yet something warmer lingers beneath your ribs, the faint echo of every hearth you passed through the night. It's strange how warmth follows you, how even when it fades, it leaves a trace. At the ridge, you turn for one last look. The castle stands against the frozen hills, a silhouette of endurance, old stone and stubborn light. You can almost imagine the hum inside, the crackle of wood, the murmur of voices, the clink of iron by the forge, the soft laughter near the kitchen fire. Life, hidden but unbroken. And in that moment, you understand why knights endured winters like this. Not through strength alone, but through ritual, community, faith. They lit fires not just for heat, but for hope, for proof that the cold would always meet its match. You breathe in deeply. The air tastes of smoke and snow. The wind brushes your face like a final whisper from the past, and you smile faintly at the thought that those ancient flames still live in every candle, every hearth, every quiet act of comfort we build against our own winters. You turn toward the open plain and begin to walk. The snow swirls behind you, covering your footprints almost as soon as they're made. The castle fades into the mist, still standing, still breathing, and the last thing you carry from it is not the memory of cold, but the warmth that refused to die. And as you keep walking, the wind begins to calm. The storm quiets, the flakes grow finer, lighter, drifting like ash from a dying fire. The world is soft again. Pale hills, silent woods, the faint glow of daylight spreading over everything. Behind you, the castle seems almost unreal now, a shape carved out of memory more than stone. Its towers melt into the haze, its smoke into the sky. You pause once more and listen. The air holds that stillness that only comes after a night of snow, a silence so deep it feels like the earth itself is resting. somewhere far inside the fortress. The first morning bell rings, muffled by distance and frost. The sound feels human, fragile, alive. You imagine the people stirring, boots sliding over cold floors, wool pulled tight around shoulders, fire poked awake until sparks leap into being. Every small sound a victory. Every spark a heartbeat. It's strange how easily you can picture it, as if the centuries between you and them were nothing at all. The snow glitters faintly now, catching the new light. A single raven crosses the sky above the walls, black wings slicing through white air. It circles once, then drifts toward the forest. Even that movement feels deliberate, a small defiance against the stillness. You start walking again, feeling the cold in your lungs but not minding it anymore. The warmth you found inside the castle, the smell of smoke, the glow of fire, the quiet courage of those who lived there, seems to follow you not as heat, but as calm. You realize that's what warmth truly was for them, a kind of peace, a fragile, earned peace, in a world that froze without asking permission. When you look back one final time, the castle has vanished behind the snow. Only a faint haze marks where it once stood, but you know it's still there, a heart of stone holding on to its hidden fires, a monument not to power or wealth, but to human endurance. You let the image fade. The cold settles around you like a blanket. Clean and still, you breathe out slowly, watching the steam of your breath dissolve into the air, and you think, not with sadness but with certainty, so they found a way to live with the cold, and so do we. Because warmth in every age begins the same way, with someone, somewhere, choosing to light the fire again. And as the path carries you farther from the castle, the land opens wide before you, a white, endless plain, glittering under a pale winter sun. The wind has softened now, its voice no longer cruel but tired, almost kind, brushing gently against your face as if to remind you that even cold can show mercy. You walk slowly, hearing the soft rhythm of snow crunching under your boots. Each sound feels ancient, echoing faintly into the silence, like footsteps shared with every traveller who ever left a fortress at dawn. The air tastes sharp, pure, clean, the kind of cold that clears the mind instead of hurting it. Behind you, the castle stands faint against the horizon, its towers still rising through a thin drift of morning mist. From this distance it looks peaceful. You can almost forget its chill, its stone walls, its endless corridors. All that remains in your memory is the fire. Steady, unyielding, human. You stop for a moment and close your eyes. In your mind, the glow of the hearth returns, the red coals shifting softly, the murmured voices of tired people warming their hands, the faint laughter that survives even in the darkest months. You realize the story isn't about the castle anymore, it's about what you carry from it. The warmth you've seen, the endurance you've felt, the proof that no night, however long, is ever completely without light. The snow thickens around your boots as you move forward again. Each breath fogs the air in front of you like a small signal of life. And it occurs to you that this is exactly what those knights, those cooks, those servants must have felt. That same quiet pride of having made it through another winter's night. The sun edges higher now, glinting off the ice in a shimmer of pale gold. You reach the rise of a hill, turn back one final time, and the castle is gone, swallowed by the white. Only a faint curl of smoke drifts upward, proof that the fires still burn somewhere within. You smile softly, pulling your cloak close. The world is vast, the air still cold, but inside you something glows, a calm, steady heat that no frost can steal. And as you walk onward into the quiet morning, one truth settles deep in your chest, warm as the last ember of the hearth you have left behind, that all through history, through every frozen night and every breath of winter, humanity has never stopped doing one simple, beautiful thing, keeping the fire alive. And the road stretches ahead, winding through the frozen fields, each step sinking slightly into the untouched snow. The horizon gleams pale gold, where the first true light of morning spills across the world. For the first time the cold feels clean instead of cruel, as if the night has been washed away, leaving only stillness. You walk slower now, not from weariness but reverence. Every sound, the crunch of snow, the faint whisper of wind, the distant call of a bird, feels sacred in its quiet. Behind you, the castle is only memory, a ghost of warmth and stone hidden beneath the white. But in your mind, its fires still glow. You can almost see them, the soft orange light flickering in narrow windows, the silhouettes of people gathered close, heads bowed toward the hearth, hands outstretched. That image follows you, steady as breath. It reminds you that warmth was never about comfort alone. It was about survival, about connection, about choosing not to surrender to the cold even when it pressed against every wall and bone. The fires that burned in that castle centuries ago are gone, but the act itself, the human need to build light against the dark, endures unchanged. You reach a small ridge and pause, looking back one last time. The sky has brightened, the snow shimmering like powdered glass. Somewhere, far behind the haze, you imagine the castle's towers catching that same light, the smoke from its chimneys rising like a slow, graceful prayer. And then you realize this is how warmth travels through time. It is not held by walls or captured by stone. It moves through memory, through stories, through the quiet will of those who keep tending it. Night after night, century after century. You stand there, breathing deeply, feeling the frost sting your lips, and the faintest thread of sunlight touch your face. It's a small warmth, fragile and fleeting, but real. You turn back toward the open plain, snowflakes swirling gently in the air, and keep walking. The sound of your footsteps fades into the silence, and somewhere far behind you a fire cracks, another log catches, and another dawn rises over the castle's ancient walls. And as the world brightens, one truth feels clear as breath in the morning air. No matter how long the winter lasts, warmth always finds its way back. And as you continue down the quiet slope, the light begins to change. No longer that grey-blue of dawn, but something softer, golden, almost tender. The snow glows faintly under it, every flake catching the sun like tiny shards of glass. The cold is still there, but it feels gentler now, like a familiar companion that has finally learned restraint. You pause, your breath rising in small clouds, and listen again to the world. The wind has died completely. You can hear the faint dripping of meltwater from distant roofs, the slow creak of branches thawing under the new warmth. It's the sound of winter loosening its grip. The same sound the knights once waited for with quiet hope. The sound that meant they had endured. Behind you, the castle lies far away, half hidden by distance and haze. But in your mind it's alive. Fires burning low in the hearths, servants carrying kindling, armor glinting faintly in morning light. Somewhere, someone laughs softly. Someone else hums an old song to keep rhythm while sweeping rushes from the floor. The details blur, but the feeling remains, a small world of warmth, breathing inside great walls of stone. You realize now that what you've been walking away from isn't just a building, but a memory of how humanity has always met hardship, with patience, with ritual, with light. The castle was never meant to stay warm forever. Its fires were meant to be rebuilt again and again by hands that refused to forget how. You stop at the edge of a frozen stream. Beneath the thin sheet of ice, water still moves, faint but alive. You crouch to watch it, realizing how much the small current resembles the fires in that ancient fortress, hidden, steady, waiting for spring. When you stand again, the sun has climbed higher, spilling across the landscape in long, bright strokes. You pull your cloak close, not against the cold this time, but out of habit, the way every knight must have done before stepping out into the snow. And as you walk onward, through the light, through the quiet, through the slow thaw of another morning, you carry with you what every one of them carried too: the warmth of endurance, the memory of flame, the unspoken promise that even in the heart of winter, the human spirit burns brighter than the frost that tries to silence it. The castle fades. The snow glitters, The air smells faintly of wood smoke far in the distance, and though you can no longer see the fire, you know it's still there, glowing behind walls of stone, patient, unending, alive. And as the light strengthens, the snow around you glows like powdered gold. The wind sighs once through the pines and falls silent again, leaving the world perfectly still. You keep walking, slow and steady, the cold nipping at your nose but no longer reaching your bones. Something of the castle's warmth lingers inside you. Not heat exactly, but steadiness, a quiet calm that feels earned. The trail winds past a small grove of leafless trees. Frost clings to every branch like lace, glittering in the morning sun. You run your glove along one, brushing away the crystals, and for a moment the bark underneath feels warm to the touch. Perhaps it's only the contrast after the long night, but it feels like proof that the world itself remembers warmth, even beneath all the ice. You glance back over your shoulder. The castle is almost gone from view now, its towers softened by the haze, its smoke thread barely visible. It stands there in your mind like a story, not about kings or battles or conquest, but about survival, about how people learned to live inside stone that froze, to laugh inside walls that breathed frost, about how fire and faith became the same thing when the nights were long. You imagine, somewhere inside those walls, a single figure still awake, a knight by the dying hearth, watching the last embers sink into ash. He leans closer, stirs the coals, and a tiny orange glow flares to life again. It's nothing grand, just one spark, but he watches it as though it were a sunrise. And maybe it is. The image stays with you as you turn forward again. The snow beneath your boots glints faintly, and the sun climbs higher until the whole landscape shines, bright, endless, forgiving. The cold is still there, but it no longer feels like an enemy. It feels like part of the same rhythm, dark and light, frost and flame, silence and heartbeat. And as you walk toward the horizon, the thought settles quietly in your chest, that every age, every soul, every winter shares the same truth, that warmth is never truly gone. It waits, it endures, it is rebuilt by hands you'll never see, in rooms you'll never visit, in hearts that refuse to let the fire die. You breathe in the sharp morning air, and it tastes clean like iron, smoke, and hope. The castle disappears behind the hills, but you can still feel its glow, faint and steady, somewhere deep within you. And when you finally step into the open plain, the world feels vast and silent, yet not empty. Because even here, under all this snow and sky, the warmth remains, invisible, ancient, and alive. And as you move farther from the castle, the path turns into open country, rolling fields glazed with frost, pale light shimmering across every ridge. The air is so clear now it almost hums, and each breath you take feels like it's made of glass and sunlight. There's no sound but the distant call of a raven and the soft hiss of wind across the snow. You stop once more to look back. The fortress sits on its hill like a memory made solid, grey, proud, enduring. Smoke still rises from its chimneys, curling upward in slow ribbons that twist into the morning sky. That thin wisp of smoke is the last visible sign of life within those cold walls, the last signal that fire still burns, that someone is awake, that the night didn't win. For a moment you think of everything hidden behind those stones, a brazier glowing in a corner, a blanket wrapped around a sleeping guard, a loaf of bread steaming beside a hearth, laughter echoing faintly through the great hall. You picture the knight by his fire again, his hands stretched out toward the warmth, his armor set aside, his eyes heavy but content. He survived the cold as countless others did before him, through nothing more than patience, habit, and the stubborn will to keep the flame alive. You feel the weight of that. How simple and how vast it is. The castle, the people, the centuries, all bound by the same ritual, the same quiet faith in warmth. Not just heat from fire, but the warmth of shared space, shared effort, shared humanity. You turn forward again, the snow crunching softly beneath your steps. The horizon burns faintly gold now, the sun just high enough to gild the edge of the world. For a heartbeat, everything glows, the snow, the sky, even your breath. And then you understand the lesson that all those winters tried to teach. That warmth isn't a place you find. It's something you build, stone by stone, fire by fire, soul by soul. You keep walking until the castle is only a blur against the light, until the sound of the wind replaces every echo. The snow begins to melt where the sun touches it, thin streams of water gliding quietly downhill, proof that no frost lasts forever. And somewhere behind you, inside that fortress of stone, a new fire is lit. The same fire that Sip's always been lit. The same one that will outlast you, and every winter still to come. And so you keep walking until even the outline of the castle fades into the pale horizon, swallowed by the light. The world opens around you, wide, white, endless, but you no longer feel small inside it. The silence is peaceful now, the kind that comes after a long night endured and a fire well tended. You pause at the crest of a hill and let your gaze sweep over the frozen fields below. The sunlight touches everything, every flake of snow, every distant tree, every ripple of frost, turning the land into a slow, shimmering sea of gold. You close your eyes and breathe, and the cold that once cut deep now feels clean, almost holy. Behind you, unseen but certain, the fires inside the castle burn on. The smoke that rises into the sky carries the breath of everyone who ever lived through winter there. Knights, cooks, servants, children, nameless hands and hearts that all did the same small miracle. They kept the warmth alive. You smile faintly, knowing the story doesn't truly end. The fires will die, and others will relight them. The winters will come, and someone will always stand before the cold, gathering light back into their palms. That is what people do. That is what we've always done. And as you take one last step forward, the snow crunches softly beneath your boots. The morning sun glows on your face, and you feel it, the quiet truth that has carried through every age, that even in the coldest fortress, beneath the darkest sky, warmth endures, because someone, somewhere, still chooses to tend the fire.